Hello. Hello and happy Thursday, everybody. Welcome to my Thursday Night Live. Tonight we're going to be talking about aircraft ownership. Whether it's a good idea to rent or to keep, is it better to own an aircraft? So always remember, don't forget to like this channel, hit that notification bell so we can continue to grow this community together. So let's just get right into it, roll the intro, and I'll be right back. Welcome, aviation enthusiasts and dreamers. If we haven't met before, my name is Bruce Bissett. I am an expert in all things airplanes. I'm a 40-year survivor in the aviation industry. I teach avionics, maintenance, aircraft ownership, and FAA regulations. I teach both online and in classrooms. My students come from high school, colleges, repair stations, and the FAA Academy. So let's start a conversation and shed some light on this wild world of aviation. Hey, welcome back. This episode is about aircraft ownership because I've had a lot of questions in the past about whether it's better to continue to rent an airplane or should I go ahead and buy an aircraft. And it's a really big decision, and you don't want to make a big mistake of buying something too big, too little. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. Also, in the leading up to this video, I've put out another video asking for questions. So at the end of the first session, we're going to cover some of the great questions I got from you, the viewers. The other thing I'd like to start seeing, this is a live feed, which means I have a chat channel, and I want to hear from all of you. Anybody who's on right now, go ahead and send me a chat. Tell me who you were, if you work for somebody in aviation now, what career you do, where you're located. Hey, I'm down here in southern Texas now. And just give me an idea. I want to interact better with you on the chat. So let's go ahead and keep chatting. And let's see, quick. So the purpose of the show tonight is going to be about renting or owning. Where the question came from was from a online post from a person learning to fly, and they had all the troubles that went with having to be a rental pilot, dealing with scheduling and sharing of the aircraft, or the aircraft be down for maintenance. And he kind of thought, well, what if I buy one? What's better? And it is definitely an option, and that's what we want to talk about tonight. We're going to talk about whether it's better to continue to rent, pros and cons, or go ahead and own an aircraft. And then when we talk about owning, should you decide to own, then we'll get through the process of at least the baby steps of owning an aircraft and obtaining one. Let's start right into it. Is it better to rent or own? They both have pros and cons. The pros of renting is you don't need to worry about storing the aircraft. You don't need to worry about maintenance of the aircraft. You just simply report squawks. You do pay for fuel on renting by the hour, right? And you don't have to worry about ADs or, worried about damage to the aircraft, because that's all going to be carried by the renting company. But the cons are also kind of the same in that the scheduling is tough. You're competing with a lot of other pilots, especially today with the fewer number of flight schools versus the number of available aircraft out there. The cons of it are also, it can be kind of expensive. It just depends on how much flying you do. We always kind of say a rule of thumb about renting and owning, and we don't want to say it as a process of learning to fly, but definitely when we're out there flying in general, owning an airplane. And 100 hours is a good baseline rule. If I want to fly an airplane for 100 hours a year, then anything more than that 100 hours, it starts becoming a better cost-effective process of actually owning an aircraft, if you could do it right. And that's what we talk about, the pros and cons of renting. Owning, the pros of owning. Well, first and foremost, the airplane's there when you want it, anytime. The other benefit is the fact that you can modify it. The airplane will be set up to the way you want it to be. You could put the equipment that you like in it, as far as avionics wise, and nobody's going to break it. If it breaks, it's on you. The other pro on it is that it can sit for a while. It could actually, it doesn't actually have to make money like a rental aircraft does. Rental aircraft, the owners have to actually keep these things flying. You can afford to let it sit for a while. That was the other thing about the pros of owning an aircraft, is being able to take it on a weekend trip. When you rent an airplane and you take it on a trip, they tend to say minimum hours, either 2, 4, 6 hours, depending on how many days they want the aircraft. Especially if it's the training aircraft. If it's an aircraft that's used for training, they may put a 4-day minimum rental time on the aircraft. If you own an airplane, you could take that 2-hour flight and let it sit for a week and then bring it back home. Some of the cons of owning an airplane is that you are responsible for the maintenance of the aircraft, keeping the insurance, protecting the aircraft, storing the aircraft. And some other things we're going to get into later on about adding aircraft, and security becomes on you with the aircraft. And there's not a lot of the cons, and probably the biggest one is that initial cost. The fun part, or the good part about owning an aircraft, is that there's a lot of companies, because aircraft do appreciate, will go through and loan on an aircraft for much longer than you would on a car, because they're going to hold their value. Also, when you buy an aircraft, sometimes they'll allow you to borrow a little more on the equity of the aircraft to allow you to upgrade the avionics, because people who finance the aircraft also know that the upgrades add to the value of the aircraft, which is also a very good thing. So, conning pros and cons. The other thing about owning an aircraft is who should own an aircraft. There's some people out there that don't have the technical savvy to be able to own an aircraft. It does have a lot of ownership responsibility that goes with it. You are the owner operator of the aircraft, so you have to understand, under the rules, you have responsibilities for that aircraft, even if you do it with partnerships. So when we talk about hello from Houston. So if we talk about a single person owner of the aircraft, this is always a joke, is that we have all sorts of regulations that people have to comply with when you're being a mechanic, to get a mechanic or to be a pilot. But there's no FAA regulations on how to be an aircraft owner, and it's something I had to deal with a lot when I was an FAA inspector. So there's 3 basic ways that you could own an aircraft: by yourself, and I've done that way. I've had I think one or two aircraft. One I owned with my father, and one I owned with me and a spouse. Or you can have a partnership, and a partnership is just a loose group of people that work together to own an aircraft. Partners tend to be also maybe one aircraft. Another way to own aircraft is in a club situation. A big benefit of a club, if you join to a club, is usually the buy-ins are really slow and they're really low. They're not very high, because the aircraft, for the most part, already purchased. The other benefit of a club is that you may have more than one aircraft to use. The club that I was in was a glider club, so we had high-performance twins, single-engine, high-performance gliders, and we also had some lower performance 2 places to give rides in. So it was really great to have a club, but again, it had all the ownerships. The club required sweat equity. So for me, I was the tow pilot, and I was also the mechanic. I was an A&P mechanic for the club, and it worked out great for me. I really did. Some days I enjoyed the towing than sometimes flying, but that's okay. The other thing that I enjoy about owning an aircraft on my own is that if I'm out there cleaning it, and especially if you clean the interior and put things away, nobody else is going to go through and mess it up for you. I mean, I've seen some aircraft, for example, Oshkosh ended here last week, and I'm guilty of it. I went through and turned on the video, and I started watching the airplanes land. Does anybody agree to watching them? Single engine glider? No, not quite. Single engine glider, that's not what you're looking at, but anyway, I thought that made me laugh. That's funny. I like that. The glider club was two-place gliders, one-place gliders, and then I flew the tow planes. So, pretty good. Good catch. But clubs are good benefits. Now, to start a club, Aircraft Owners of Pilot Association, AOPA, does have assistance that they can help you with to be able to start a club. For me personally, there's a lot of restrictions on that. I'm going to probably own an airplane later on in life, but again, it's financially based. It's not. There's a lot of cost that goes with that, which we are going to get into in a minute. So you can own it yourself, partnership, or club. How are we doing over there? What should you buy? And that is always an interesting situation. If you own an aircraft by yourself and you're learning to fly, then a small airplane here, the small one here is a Cessna 150, 152s, a Piper Cherokee 140s or something like that. They don't have very far in distance. They don't have a lot of payroll or fuel, but they're great trainers. They're stable aircraft. They're easy to learn, and they're not too expensive. Now, the Cessnas were competing with the light sport aircraft that have been coming out, and I'll talk about the home builds here in a second, or the other category of aircraft that's called the light sport aircraft, LSAs. So the cost of these 150s has really gone up in value because they're a type certificate aircraft. They haven't made them in a long time, and they're great little airplanes to learn in. In fact, I learned in one myself many years ago. The home built is tempting to buy. We used to have a joke that home built aircraft have the resale value of used concrete, in that they're really great and useful for the person who built the aircraft. But the problem is that it's very difficult to get a flight instructor to give you training in it, or especially to let you loose being solo in it. Home built aircraft tend to be, I'm going to say, not. I'm going to choose my words carefully here. They're not standard in a normal type certificated aircraft that'd be like the Cessna 150 here. They can be kind of difficult to fly. They can be difficult to learn in. They may have also different systems because they don't have to comply with federal air regulations like the type certificated aircraft that do on either side of the page here. But also in the same sense, I've seen a lot of owners in my time with the FAA go through and buy too much airplane initially. There was another terrible joke about the fork-tailed Dr. Killer, and that was a play to the Bonanza V-tail. And this was it was a high performance retractable gear all metal aircraft. I could have put a picture up it, but I didn't. The reason why we call it a fork-tailed Dr. Killer is because doctors had lots of money, and they would learn to fly. And at the time, Piper, Aeronica Champs, Cessna 152s, etc. And then the next airplane they buy, because they have the means to do so, they jump into a very high-performance aircraft like that, and that gets way ahead of them. To own an aircraft like you see on the side, that's a Cessna 180. Somebody's asked a question: is home built the same thing as experimental? Yes. A home-built airplane is an experimental category. It means that somebody had built the aircraft for entertainment or education, is the way the FAA calls it when they issue it. And they can also maintain their own aircraft. We're going to talk about that in a difference. In fact, one of the two questions I got that we're going to talk about the other session was dealing with the repairment certificate of a home built. But yes, it is an experimental. There is a couple different categories of experimental, but for something that we're going to buy, these home builds they go on the market quite a bit, and for the most part, home builds that I've seen in the market, like the Glass Airs, are, you're talking about a 250 mile an hour aircraft. It's very fast. They are designed to fly in all weather. It's almost a lot of times too much airplane for people. But the same thing is the Cessna you see on the right side. That's too much for a new pilot. It's a tail dragger, which we call conventional gear, which is another level of learning that you have to do. It has a constant speed propeller, lots of horsepower. So this is not what I would buy as a first aircraft. So you want to find something in the middle. A Cessna 172 is fine. Or even if you want to go, a Piper 160 would probably be okay. 160 and a 140 on the Pipers. They're both low wings, but the difference is they have a little more horsepower between one and the other. I don't get too hung up about having people buy, oh, does it need to be fixed propeller or does it need to have a constant speed propeller? It would just be something extra that you would have to learn to use, to learn to operate. So that would be the importance of choosing that aircraft. Don't get hung up on whether it's a constant speed propeller is what they call it. It's just an extra level you'd have to learn, which would add to that time it would take before your flight instructor will cut you loose on the aircraft. So you want to pick an airplane that's just right for you. Another thing about being careful about new aircraft, and we'll talk about here in the next one, is where to put it. Aircraft that are metal, like on the twos on the outside, they do fine being parked outside in the sun. However, if an aircraft has a fabric covering, they call it, it's actually called polyfiber now. It's a plastic base. But, or fiberglass aircraft, the sun just destroys them, and the value of your aircraft will go away very quickly. So if you want to buy a fiberglass aircraft or a fabric aircraft, you need to put it undercover, which will actually add to the cost of the aircraft when it comes to sun. So we're just in the first couple of slides. A lot to already adjust here. And let's talk about where to keep it. 3 general places out there, either on the ramp, fairly inexpensive. They're always available. Ramp spaces are available at most airports. The other thing about what airport is also what airport for your partners. If you want to go in a partnership, you kind of want to be one, I'm learning to fly. I certainly don't want to be at the major airport learning to fly. I want to be at one of the outer airports. But if I'm a business person and I use the aircraft for business, I do want to be closer to in to where services are, so I could get fuels. And then also maybe if I get my instrument rating, I want to be where I could get a clearance from an airport. Not necessary, but which airport you choose needs to be chosen. Out on the ramp, it's fine. You just have to remember, as an aircraft owner, when you clean it up at the end of the day and you tie it down, you put the wheel chucks in, you cover up all the holes so the little critters don't get into it. And I'm going to probably do another live view session about taking care of your aircraft. The next one, I'm loving it. I'm from Arizona. We call them shade covers in Arizona because we want to protect it from the sun. Here in Texas, they call it hail cover because hail is more of a danger to these aircraft than of course the sun in Arizona. Whatever you call it, it's protection from the sky. So sun probably does as much damage as rain to an aircraft. The damage to aircraft with rain, especially in the freezing climates, is that if it gets into crevices of the aircraft and settles out, it freezes and actually can expand and break and fracture, especially the plastic pieces on aircraft. And that's probably why you've seen on wingtips of these aircraft that have plastic wingtips or fiberglass wingtips, they get fractured because they get soaked with rain, they freeze, and they destroy themselves. The best place to keep your airplane is in a hangar. Hangars I have to be careful now because they're hard to come by in most metro areas. Reason being is there's a waiting list. Here I am in San Antonio. There's definitely a waiting list for hangar space. There is an airport south of here is actually building new hangars, so they're trying to meet their demand. In fact, all of their shade covers are locked up. All of their hangars are locked up, so they decided to go ahead. The city down there decided to go ahead and put new hangars. That's great. And another airport that I'm an IA out of, same thing. Every place that's shade cover or hangared is locked up, so people are building new hangars. But even with that being said, it still might be a waiting list, and that might be a factor in what airplane you buy, is where you can keep it. I can only speak for Arizona when I was in for my airplane. I first bought it. We ended up parking it outside. It had a Cessna 172. It's a straight tail. It was a 58 model. He parked it outside, I guess, a year before I got a covered parking area. And then eventually, I think I kept the covered parking until I sold the airplane. And I bought a twin that actually I lucked out and I got into a hangar at another airport. And the hangar is the best thing, but that's going to be coming down to one of your fixed costs of owning an aircraft. What you pay to park it, where do you pay to keep it. And then talking about fixed costs, who are you going to get to maintain it? There are freelance mechanics out there. You'll go up to the counter by the fixed base operator, look on the bulletin board, and you'll see a card up there for a mechanic or an IA that could do quick repairs. Most often, you're going to be using repair stations for at least your components of the aircraft. Okay, less cost, freelance mechanics, which is what I am. I'm a freelance mechanic. I don't have the overhead of a building, but I also don't have the luxury of having a 145 as far as I don't get a big customer base. 145 is the regulation for repair stations that the FAA has oversight on. They not only will work on general aviation aircraft owners, but they also work on air carriers, which is the for-hire aircraft. Another thing you need to consider is where are you going to get your inspections done? Every year, an aircraft is required an annual inspection, and it has to be done by either a repair station or by somebody like me who has a inspection authorization. For somebody like me, I'm not going to do an annual inspection on the ramp or even an open area because I want to make sure that I protect the aircraft when I take it apart. So you need to find a hangar for that to be done. If you can't find a hangar you could borrow for a while, rent for a while to be able to do your annual, then you're probably better off taking it to a repair station, and you're going to add that to the cost. And the last part about who's going to maintain your airplane is that the FAA does allow in the past to be able to do owner maintenance. In fact, in the Federal Air Regulation FAR 43, in Appendix A, there's a whole listing on there that talks about major repairs, major alterations, and the very last part of that appendix in 43 has a list of owner preventative maintenance tasks. And there's a lot of caveats here, and I'm definitely going to do another live stream on that one regulation, owner preventative maintenance, what you can do. The rule was written at a time when the aircraft were really simple. Back when a 1958 172, which didn't have a whole lot of electronics, it didn't have a whole lot of composites or fiberglass material or plastic for quite frankly. So it really became, right now today, your owner maintenance is going to be limited. And then I'm definitely going to do another video on owner assisted annuals. The joke is I charge double for that. But we'll talk about that in another videos. So I'm going to take a breath here. How are we doing? Give me something in the chat to say hi, see how you're doing. Because I would say it back myself. So I see Mr. Jazz Tube, howdy. In fact, that's the only one. So go ahead and say something in the chat, which is okay because this video will go public later on. But I do want to go through and interact with you. Very quiet. I know you're out there. I can see the. There we go. Oh, you were at Deer Valley in Phoenix. Covered, then hangared. And then the second in Hemet, outside of California. I know what Hemet is. So you've had aircraft in hangar quite a bit. Considering starting my fourth, I'm going to go right now looking at the future of aircraft sales. I'm going to go ahead and go off script a little bit here. I have a friend of mine. He's a Vietnam veteran pilot. He flew F-4 Phantoms in the Vietnam War. He was the coolest guy ever. He's still not used to be. He lives in Arizona now. I haven't seen him. I'm hoping maybe this weekend I'll go see him. Great guy. He owned airplanes. We used to live at an airpark, and he had a 172, and he had a Baron that I did his annuals on. And he got to be 80 years old before he decided to stop flying. And the reason why I said is because the insurance company shut him off. I'm kind of thinking, well, if I'm 80 years old, why do I need insurance? But that's another subject. but because the airplane was all paid for and anything else. But he decided to get out of it, and he's not alone. The average age of our pilots today, the people that are owning aircraft, is really getting older, and we're not having a whole lot of people that are buying aircraft for recreation. There's still a big demand out there for training aircraft, and people are training in airplanes up to the Cessna 182s and the larger Pipers, and then also they're doing a lot of training in the Cirrus aircraft, at least in my area here in Texas, which are, it's kind of like taking driver's ed in a Tesla. It's a very expensive thing to go training in, but if you don't mind bumping a few corners with it, that's fine. But it was a trend, the fact that he was getting out of maintenance and where are these airplanes going. So there might be a point where the price of these aircraft are to start coming down. My concern as a mechanic is that they tend to stop flying before they actually think about selling their aircraft. And the danger there is the aircraft tendency to deteriorate. Airplanes love to fly. Hi from Uruguay? Uruguay, awesome. Airplanes want to fly. And that's always true. I mean, when I used to have a Piper Geronimo, which is an Apache. It's a twin-engine airplane. And if it sat for a month, it had squawks. If I flew it every couple of days, it ragged like a top. It's just the way with airplanes. Airplanes don't like to sit. And unfortunately, a lot of these aircraft have been sitting for years before maybe the families decide, okay, it's time to sell it or time to part it. Because we really, as aircraft owners, we get attached to our aircraft. We really do. I mean, they're... I don't want to say you'll trade your children for it, but my son was a pilot also, so he would take it before me. Oh, yeah, I said I bought my current plane from somebody who lost their medical. That's true. I mean, I could talk about that too. The FAA did come up with another medical. I would say Mr. Jehestu gave me that. People stop flying for a lot of different reasons. Could be some great bargains out there. But then also keep in mind, don't buy it in over your head. You could always buy an airplane that's good for you right now, like a 172, and then use that airplane's equity to move up to a more higher performance aircraft before buying right now. Because I know the temptation to be there. This is like a great bargain, It's always that joke. Always, no such thing as a free puppy. Let's see. I'm looking at the chat here. Yeah. Love it. He could. Yes. This is the big thing, because cost between renting and owning is always a big deal. So, what's that? I got a question?
Oh, I thought that's what you were saying.
No. So I have an assistant here that helps me out.
Thank you, sir.
Let's talk about the cost. You're going to have fixed costs of owning an aircraft and variable cost per hour of owning an aircraft. If you're an owner by yourself, then that's not an issue to you. An airplane costs what an airplane costs. If you're sharing an airplane in a partnership, and I always kind of say, in my world, the best ratio of owners to airplane is you don't want to have more than 4. There's 4 weeks in a month. So that gives everybody a chance to fly at least once a week. I know there's 7 days in a week and stuff, but not everybody flies on the same day. Any more than that, you start getting conflicts. Any less than that, the costs become prohibitive. You really are looking for a balance between costs and utilization of the aircraft also. So what are your fixed costs? Well, it's going to be your hangar, your tie down, your shade cover. Okay, that becomes a fixed cost per month. The other fixed cost per month is always going to be the insurance on it. And insurance is actually pretty strange. You're probably going to get it for all the partners from the same company. AOPA is a great source. That's who I use even as a renter. I still use them, being one of the benefits of being a member of AOPA. But the other thing is that yes, that's great. Somebody says we use Google Calendar for scheduling. Absolutely. Again, And I bet you your airplane, I'm looking at the chat, I bet you your airplane doesn't break down very much because it flies quite a bit. But the issue of insurance, not every pilot, if I've got a pilot who's just starting to fly, the insurance cost is going to be twice of a person who's maybe got their private pilot versus somebody who's a commercial pilot that has their instrument rating or commercial, multi-engine rating, accessory, so on. So that's going to have to be divided among the three members because they all have to cover the hull cost, the replacement cost of the aircraft. So that gets into the complexes of a partnership. Who covers the liability? Usually pilots are on their own. Who covers the hull? Everybody splits that evenly. Even though the risk to the aircraft is higher for the lower time pilot. It's just, what you have to worry about when you're coming up with a partnership.
Right now.
So I got a great example here. I'm going to go through, it comes from AOPA, but it does a good example of what it would cost for a typical aircraft. And remember, I'm looking at the prices of these things, and I'm going, you're a little out of date right now, because I can assure you gas is much more than $4 a gallon. I've seen it as high as $6, and I've seen, I watched a video of somebody going to Oshkosh, and the lowest fuel they got was $4.80, and they were happy they got $4.80, which sounds pretty good. So the example I'm showing here, let's say someone buys 172, which is just a 4-place single-engine low-tech aircraft, pays $39,000 for it. It has a mid-time engine. You always have to look at the value of the engine because you're always going to go through, and that per hour cost is going to be the money you set aside for that engine overhaul, or if you have a variable pitch propeller, the propeller overhaul. So it gets calculated in. If they have, outdated avionics, and then I'll do another live stream about avionics and upgrades. Definitely coming on. So adding avionics to an aircraft is always a great investment, but again, it adds to the fixed cost because you're going to be financing that as part of the aircraft. So we have a person. Person A expects to spend, for each hour they fly, maybe 300 hours in the next 12 months. However, since he only averaged 100 hours for each of the past 3 years, he decides to make two estimates. Let's do one based on 300 hours a year usage versus a 100 hour. So this person finds the fixed cost, gets an insurance quote from AOPA, and it came in at $1,200 a year for insurance. That's probably low now, but it is. Another one, Hangar, at $250. I'm using these numbers because it's easy math. Hangar cost right now could easily cost you $500 plus, and especially in a larger metro area. While a monthly loan payment, say a 90% of the purchase cost, we're to talk about, because you could finance that aircraft out for 10 years, we'll call it $400 or $500. So over all that, between the rent, the insurance for the pilot, insurance for the aircraft, the hangar cost, and the loan costs, you'll have, say, $3,400 a year. If Frank goes through and spends $40 an hour for fuel, a couple dollars an hour for oil, you have to think about that. If you live in a congested area like California, you may have to pay landing fees. So that could add up to $50 depending on how much you fly. The airplane will run 8 gallons an hour at $5 a gallon. Again, that's a low number. And Cessna Skyhawk could expect 7.4 at cruise, 5,000 feet. Cruise, low cruise setting, you want to be efficient. You could easily end up flying close to your hourly rate, not including rental, just for fuel and everything else, at, oops, I lost my place, probably $50 an hour is probably not unrealistic just for the variable cost of the aircraft, times the 300 you'd be flying over the year, which is why you have to think about the fact that your rental cost right now, you're looking at close to, I think there was a 172 that's near my place that I use. It's $150 an hour. It's wet. And then some of the other aircraft, the Cirrus, are over $250 to $300 an hour. So you can see that the cost of ownership I fly the same amount of hours, but if I'm only spending money on consumables, the more the more hours I fly, the less money I will spend overall because I only have the hangar versus trying to rent. So that's kind of what I'm trying to get here. That it is, if I plan to fly, again, 100 hours is a good cutoff point. It was for me. I flew when I was learning to fly close to 300 or 400 hours a year, probably more, because I had a twin also. So that took care in feeding also. So your variable costs, fuel, oil, engine reserve per hour. And that's exactly right. Jess says you always want to put extra money in the hour in the engine reserve. The more people you have as partnership, the more that engine reserve gets spread out among the people. So also talks about planning. You really want to think about, okay, if I got an airplane that's coming up on 300, 400, 500 hours from TBO, and unfortunately those tend to be what's available. People will use that excuse to sell an airplane because it's due an overhaul. And they may put it off, said, well, I can't afford the overhaul right now, so they sell it. Well, that burden becomes on the new owners that you'll have to factor in. So once you decide on that, you're going to be flying your hours. It's worthwhile you own. You got 3, 4, 5 people you really like. You work well together. Like I said, you could use Google Calendar and other types of flight planning program to work together. Get a good solid agreement between you about how you're going to handle annuals. I had one issue with my friend who had the partnership with the Baron. He would help me with the annuals. He'd help me pull panels out. He'd be there lubricating. I mean, this poor man was in his 70s, and he was out there every day. But the partner in the airplane, the other one, he would never come out. And it would irritate him that he wouldn't share in the sweat equity of owning the airplane. You really do want to have everybody together. Would you pay for me as an inspector in the aircraft? If the airplane, if it's something that I have to take apart, I'm doing it as a mechanic. I'm charging by the hour for that. It's different when I'm doing it as an inspector, because when I'm working as an inspector, I'm charging for the inspection. So the more help I get from the owners, the less money it'll cost you for an annual inspection. So it helps. But anyway, that's another subject. We'll stick on the pre-buy. Very important. Get a person to do the pre-buy inspection on it. That person is going to check the aircraft records. Part of owning an aircraft, you're required by regulation to turn over the aircraft records to the next owner, which includes the engine logbooks, the airframe logbooks. There should be one each. If it's a variable pitch propeller, then you should have a logbook for the propeller. Especially these airplanes start getting to be 30, 40 years old. These 3 items have different times on them because an engine usually will be overhauled 3 times in the life of the airframe. But in the aircraft records, you're going to go through and you need to hire somebody to make sure that the airworthiness directives have been complied with. And make sure, because those could be really expensive, especially if the airworthiness directives that involve engines. If you go back and look at an AD was missed after an overhaul, and the previous overhaul didn't record the airworthiness directive, it's up to you then to make sure it's done. That means you may have to pull the airplane apart or pull the engine apart, and that could be really expensive. Again, that goes into your offer purchase price of the aircraft. Pre-purchase, anyway, also getting back to the records. You want to have records going back as far back as you can. Again, aircraft that are 30, 40, 50 years old, they may not have the very first logbooks, but there is a way you could go through and reconstruct records. Is if the aircraft had a major repair, major alteration done in its life, and with avionics it might, because as avionics upgraded, the mechanic who does the upgrade will go through and issue a 337, an FA Form 337. Right now, we require repair stations and IAs to include the aircraft total time on the 337. And that's done to help us to rebuild records if aircraft records get lost. So it's not all is lost if you lose the aircraft records. It just goes for the fact that it's going to cost the new owner money to validate all the airworthiness directives. Airframe airworthiness directives can be easily checked, verified, and looked at by part number or condition, things like that. The engine airworthiness directives, they really get that could get expensive because that might require an engine teardown at that point to validate. So you really want to, an airworthiness directive for an engine is more costly than one before an airframe. If we were to put it together. Let's see. I'm going to go read a comment here. Good. Don't forget about potential title issues. Absolutely. Any mechanic can put a mechanic's lien through Oklahoma City, through the airport directories. The issue is that it's not much of a legal action, and what it does, it just simply puts a hold on it from Oklahoma City when it comes to aircraft transfers. Sometimes, like I said, sometimes the mechanic may have gotten paid, but then they didn't go through and release the lien. If it takes a notification to put a lien on it, that same person has to be able to put it off. So that was also problems. But yeah, you're exactly right. Pre-buy inspections, these are all items that if you hire somebody to do a pre-purchase inspection, which is what I do, not a lot, but I do quite a bit. It's hot here in Texas. I don't like to do them in the summertime. But you can save a lot of money in the end because that should come off the price of the airplane when it comes in, because that's the aircraft's value. You want a fair value for the aircraft. Let's see. So what's the final word on this? Well, the final word is, would you do it? For me, aviation for 42 years. I have owned aircraft. I'm going back to, I was probably since 91, 1972. Would I own it again? Absolutely. My situation is a little different in the fact that myself and my dad were both AMPIAs, and so was my son was also on airframe. So maintenance for us was about parts. Labor itself was fine. If you've got a good shop that you know about, you're willing to work with the mechanics, or you're willing to be able to do a lot of assistance. Absolutely, it's worth the money to do that. And then that's absolutely, totally, Martin. You could save more money than you paid. It's very true when it comes to a good pre-buy inspection. If I do a pre-buy, it's not the same as an annual, but I'm looking at a lot of paperwork and documents. So you may see it almost being charged at the same rate as an annual, because I'm going to do an AD search on an aircraft for a pre-buy. That's one of the things I do. And then I do a physical inspection of the aircraft. I don't take the airplane apart, but I have a borescope, so keep that in mind. But I can look and get a general idea of the level of corrosion in the aircraft, for example. I'll go through and I can tell an aircraft has been properly lubricated over the years. A lot of stuff gets missed over the years, and this all adds to its condition. But I definitely would own one. Again, it's still about, if you're just going to be a pilot that flies after you got your private pilot, your day VFR only, then it definitely would be worth the time to rent at that point. But if you really want to get into flying, or you're looking to build hours, under the new rules, even to be a pilot, and I feel bad for people coming up as pilots now, is that, for example, if you go to Embry-Riddle, I'm going to change my screen here. Say if you go to Embry-Riddle, for example, to their flight school, and it's a great flight school, don't get me wrong, but you're done at the end of it, you've got anywhere, you could have close to $200,000 in debt, but you may only have 300 to 400 hours in your logbook. And the problem with that is that you need to get an airline job in a 121 airline, not 135s, but 121s. Scheduled air service, you need to have an ATP. Now, you went to Embry-Riddle, which is great, because they have an hour bump from the 2,000 to the 500, 1,500 hours or 1,200 hours. I forget which one it is. It's been a long time since I been an ATB. But if you go to a formal school, then the FAA will give you more credit per hours versus somebody like me for the ATP. But you have to go get 800 hours of cross-country multi-engine time. And for me, I bought an aircraft. That's how I did it, because I was a mechanic at Southwest Airlines to help pay for it, for the airplane. And gas was only $2.70 a gallon, and I whined then. In fact, when I had to go to California for hours to go fly, I used to carry as much fuel from Arizona as I could to come back out because, darn it was so expensive. Today, it's still going to be a great career. It's just going to be tough to get into. Let's see. I always like to ask out I'm looking at the chats. Any questions on the chats? If you didn't catch me now in the chats, I'll keep the comments down below. I'll look at them later. What we're going to talk about next, we're going to shift away from the aircraft ownership to. I put a video out. It had a couple other questions that came that actually came through the other video, which was fantastic, that I wanted to talk about now. I had a question from Ricardo. And Ricardo says, this was in relation to the first live feed I did, and we talked about the repairment certificate. These were careers in aviation. And he wanted me to go in more detail about that repairment certificate. And the gist of the conversation was about okay, what license did I need to get into aviation? And okay, I'll just, if I can't, an A&P really took a lot of time, effort, money, and it's 1,800 hours or 1,950 hours at a school, or 3 years working for a company. Let me just go and get a repairman. Well, the issue is that's not the way a repairman works. A repairman certificate is a certificate issued by the FAA to comply with that provision in Part 43 that a person who is properly certificated on Part 65 returns to serve their signs for the work being done. So what they did is they would use repairman certificates issuing to companies only. You had to be recommended by the company to get a repairman. So this would be for a large repair station, MROs, or an airline, Part 121, for their avionics technicians. And sometimes their structures technicians, but that the issue with that is the repairman certificate cannot be issued to an individual for any task that would be covered by the certificate privileges of an airframe or power plant technician. Meaning that if I have somebody that does, for example, I'm trying to pick somebody that's doing sheet metal repairs on a general aviation aircraft, and said, well, I don't have an airframe rating, can you give me a repairman? No, that function's covered under the airframe certificate. So we cannot issue a repairman certificate to cover that. At least we try not to. It absolutely cannot be issued for required airframe inspections. So if I'm working for a repair station, I can't do an annual inspection with a repairman. If I'm working for an airline, I can't do an A, B, or C check or return to service. I have to have an A and P for that. So repairman certificates have a very narrow function. You'll be issued it. They look an awful lot like an A and P. The principal inspector to the operation, to the repair station, will issue it based on a recommendation of the company that needs one. A great example is I worked at a repair station that did accessories, which means they didn't work on an aircraft. They worked on the components of the aircraft. So they did generators and pressure controllers and things like that, electronic devices. So they didn't need an airframe power plant. They weren't specifically working on aircraft, but they still had to meet Part 65. So the repair station had put in their final inspection area repairman certificates that were issued by me. I actually filled them out as an FAA inspector, and then it would issue to them. The repairman certificate actually becomes under my control, under my surveillance as an FAA inspector. So that took time. I would never, as an FAA inspector, I never would allow people to just get them, willy-nilly. I mean, I know there were some places, I'll just give everybody one. No, because I have to type in what the function that person is going to be doing in the repair station on the certificate. And when that individual's signing for it, unlike an A&P, they don't sign with their number, A&P number. They sign with the repair station or airline that they represent. The airlines usually use an employee number, but that's something else. So don't look at a repairman certificate as a goal to get for a job. You carry your skills to the job and then get the repairman certificate because who hires you needs that skill from you. So that's what that's for. A great example is that I'm trying to find a good example. I'm trying to remember. There's so many examples. One other thing to talk about is on the repairman certificate, when you leave the company or you leave the position in the airline, say for example that individual is no longer in quality and goes up into management, the certificate's got to be turned into the FAA. It has to be taken off the roster. The repair stations, airlines will keep rosters of all the people who could do return to service statements. So it doesn't carry to other companies. So if I get a repairman certificate at company A, you can't use it anywhere else but at company A. So you're still uncertificated. Now, getting back to what I was talking about before, well, how do I get one? If you get an NCAT AET and one rating, okay, the FAA has allowed avionics shops, these are people that do repair on avionics systems and components, to be able to use that knowledge qualifications, the NCAT certification, to allow a technician to apply for a repairman certificate. Otherwise, the repair station has to qualify the individual through training. And now I remember what my example was. I've got an A&P mechanic. He's doing ADS-B installs. So he's doing an avionics install on an aircraft. He wants to be able to do the transponder certification. Now, ADS-B was part of the transponder system for the aircraft. It's a device that communicates with air traffic control. And this particular ADS-B unit, for it to be certified for return to service, needs a valid altimeter correlation check. Now, altimeter correlation check has to be done by a person holding an instrument rating. An A&P mechanic, under their privileges, is actually prohibited from performing work on instruments and propellers because of the special nature of the special tools, equipment, trade, nature, and stuff. So you have to, even if you're an A&P, but if you're doing that altimeter certification, you have to have a repairman certificate. So this A&P mechanic who's been doing this installs goes to his local FAA inspector and says, I need a repair station rating with this rating on it. You already had a repair station. You wanted to add Appendix E and F, which is actually 91-413 is what we're talking about, or 411-413. And he needs a repairman certificate. The FAA inspector turned him down because he didn't have anything in his training record that showed that he ever had any experience in doing the altimeter test and inspection. So, and it doesn't mean you have to have experience, you have to have or training. So for him, I created my transponder training course. So that allowed him to get the certification. It was a 6-hour course. It's on my Thinkific website for that one. So with training and experience, you'll get recommendation from an operator to get your repairman certificate. Like I said, it's only good there. So that takes care of Ricardo's question. It's not something that you aim for. It's just something that allows you to work as an uncertificated individual to be certificated when you work for an airline or air carrier. Now, the other question I have coming in here is from Herman Cortez. I'll read it. Looking for a little career advice. I am a reservist near Austin, and I'm about to have my 5 level in electrical environmental. So to my mind right now, I'm thinking he's aimed more at avionics. My goal is to have my own business doing maintenance. What recommendations, certifications would you recommend? If you're going to carry experience from the military, your MOS AFSC code is going to determine whether you're eligible to get credit for the airframe or power plant certificate. However, if you're electrical and environmental, my aim is to go for avionics, because you'll have the base knowledge to be able to move on to, like I said, NCAT, AET, get the add-on ratings, and then work with somebody to get the other experience that you need. So as far as having your own business, great. I would probably recommend a 145 certificate for you. But the FAA will not issue a certificate unless you, as the person in charge, has you or technicians working for you for at least 3 to 5 years of experience of doing that work. So, and that's one of the things I teach. I teach a 145 course through the course. So, Herman, you're back on. It says, can military members get the repairment certificate recommendation for the FAA application from their chain of command? In the military, the short answer to that is, unfortunately, the military don't need repairs. They don't need repairment certificates, so they have no process within to issue a repairment certificate. They don't have a need for them. For the work that you do on aircraft, that's part of your training within the military system. So now, if your question is about the A and P, if you have the MOS or the AFSC code, if you're meaning you're either Navy, Army, Air Force, AFSC is for Air Force Specialty Code, there is an FAA order on giving credit for an airframe and power plant certificate. Now, it used to be when you were a crew chief in the Air Force, it was almost automatic that you could get permission to take the written exams for the A&P from the FAA. That's changed in that if you're a crew chief, they're only going to give you airframe credit now. However, they've also changed it. They went the other way in that if you are working on military legacy aircraft, for example, this is a great situation. I was working counter duty at the FAA office. I had 2 technicians coming in. They wanted the A&P authorization to take the written. They both were based on experience. They had the 36 months experience. I had a gentleman that worked up at Cottonwood, Arizona. I remember it was Cottonwood. He worked on Pipers, Cessnas, small GA aircraft. The other person came in, worked for NASA. He worked on the 747 that hauled around the space shuttle. And I could give the sign-off to the guy from Cottonwood. I could not give the sign-off to the person from NASA. The reason being, at the time, you had to have been working on type certificated aircraft. And the NASA had pulled and did their own maintenance processes not using type certificated data. So he couldn't get credit for 36 months for working on this aircraft. Unfortunately, now that has changed. So if you're still working on F-16s, Black Hawk helicopters, these things are all non-type certificated, but they're also non-derivative. But if you work on the KC-10, if you work on there's a 737 derivative military aircraft, then the FAA will allow credible experience to go get your written based on the military derivative aircraft. So if there's a civil version of the airplane you're working on, then you can get credit for your A&P sign-off. But military members' repairment certificate is not anything that you can be issued to carry. You can't carry it around. Let's put it that way. It's only good at the place where you work that needs a repairment certificate. And the only but would be the repairment certificate for building a home-built aircraft. I told you to go back to home-builts again. If you are the builder of the aircraft, sole builder aircraft, you could show the FAA documentation. And if you're working with the EAA, Aircraft Electronics, Experimental Aircraft Association, which they had their air show at Oshkosh here recently, they'll work with you and get the builder's log, and you'll document as the builder, have pre-inspections come in. Then, if you have proven that you've made 51% of this aircraft, the FAA will issue you a repairment certificate so you as the builder can perform the safe condition inspection that's required for that aircraft every year. So even though it doesn't have to have an annual inspection, it must have a condition inspection, the experimental aircraft, every year to fly in the United States. And two types of people could do it: the original owner with the repairment certificate, or an A&P mechanic can do it. So that is the only repairment certificate that be issued to an individual. And believe it or not, on the notes section in there, it'll only say for that aircraft, and it won't transfer to any other aircraft. And when the airplane is sold to somebody, that repairment certificate becomes null and void. I shouldn't say that. That original person could go back and do a pre-inspection on it, which is okay also. Next thing, so definitely, Herman, definitely NCAT AET is where you want to go. And that's these books back here. Also, I have an online course on the first half. Now, there's a whole video on my YouTube channel that talks about the NCAT AET and how it breaks it up by section. Definitely it's where I start. If you're just getting into aviation, let's see, what's the other? You talk about AET, perfect place to go, get into avionics. The other thing is also, absolutely, you could work with somebody, work with an avionics shop, or work with a maintenance shop, and work as an apprentice. I'm starting to see more and more apprenticeships. You're welcome. I'm seeing more and more apprenticeships from companies too, so that's also an option also. So anyway, I always want to say, please give me comments, give me questions. This video will be up, published later on the website. I will be traveling in the next week. I'll be doing a 145 repair station class coming up, and I'll be back the following Thursday to do another live stream. Please give your comments down below. I always write down the questions. Now, some of the questions y'all give me are great, but they take research. So if there's anybody else that wants to say anything, and this is great, by the way, I have tripled my viewage from the last one, so thank you very much. The whole point is that I definitely want to take my avionics experience, the materials I created. I used to have an avionics class. Everybody's starting to look at online training as a viable way to train technicians. Now, some people are old school that said, no, I'm not going to do it. I need the tactile. I need to touch. You do, absolutely, but you need the basics. So I'm getting more and more busy on the online training, but I also enjoy live teaching. As you probably could tell, I'm kind of in a box here. So I do like to be out in a classroom. I'm more animated in person than I am in this little box here. But I enjoy doing these. I'll be back the following Thursday. Excuse me. Oh, Lackland. Herman Lackland? Where in Texas are you based? Sorry, you guys are great. You're talking to yourself. You're chatting to yourself. I love that. I appreciate the time you give me here. I really want to build this channel. Thank you for staying on with me this long. Remember, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell. I said I'm going to be every other week right now. I hope to be able to be every week. I can always come up with more subjects, but I also love the fact that I can answer your questions too. So, other thing, always great to be live. Thank you. I'll say one more question. Great, I'm in Houston. What about AVED? AVED is me. I have an online presence. AVED as the company, I move around. So I do online training here in San Antonio. So I do Zoom courses, but I actually do them for the FAA Academy. So I'll teach. In fact, that's what I finished today is a class at the Academy. I do about 15 classes for the FAA, but then I also do traveling on the road. So right now I'm going to Arizona to do an FAR 145 class for an operation to help their technicians. So that is me in avionics education, or AVED. That's why I said I wanted to say AVED or avionics education. I say thanks again. Thank you for the comments. This is fantastic. And I'm hoping to keep this channel improving for you and being out there. I really enjoy teaching. I enjoy asking questions. So let's keep it up. So until next